Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're live with Dr. J. Mitchell Perry talking about managing your emotions. And here's Dr. J. Mitchell Perry.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Perry, and once again, we're very pleased to do live here on what are we on live with Facebook, and I believe we're also live with YouTube. And it appears going forward that we're going to be live on Tuesday mornings, and we're going to be live on Friday mornings as well. And there'll be much more prepared information on Fridays, and on Tuesdays, it's more going to be a Ask Dr. Perry. You can submit questions during the show, or you can submit questions in advance of the show for Tuesdays. And of course, today, as I go through the material, you're certainly welcome to make some comments, send them to me in real time, and you're also welcome to ask some questions. So we are still dealing with COVID-19. And if you are like everybody else, you've gone through a bit of a roller coaster of emotions going through this program. We've been at it for some form of 6 weeks, and it's entirely likely that we're still going to be at staying at home, or we're going to be very cautious about the extent to which we go out into public, probably for the next several months. It's unclear because most people are really quite unclear, or perhaps misinformed, or perhaps unwilling to get informed about how to handle themselves through this particular situation. I imagine most of you out there, if you're dealing with COVID-19, and everybody is to some degree, I imagine most of you out there are going through an emotional roller coaster. You've been afraid, you've lost your job, or you certainly have less money, or you're concerned about how you're going to feed everybody. You feel concerned because perhaps your parents are elsewhere and you're unable to go see them and attend to them. Perhaps you're concerned because you now have to work from home and the kids are at home too. And just managing that is very difficult and upsetting for a lot of people. So I want you to know that today has to do with the whole notion of managing your emotions so you can capitalize on the good ones and you can figure out a way to replace the bad ones. And what I notice now going on is I am getting now more phone calls from either existing patients or brand new patients to want to talk to me. And the reason they do is they've been living together for a long time, and it's putting a lot of stress on the marriage. Or they're staying at home and it's putting stress on the kids. Or now that you have to do the job at home, it's difficult to manage the kids while you're trying to do your job at the same time. So I noticed that people are getting more upset and wanting to get some help along the way. And then this week, May 3, in the Detroit Free Press, very, very famous and extraordinarily talented author put an article together. And it was also copied on USA Today. And I looked at it, and it was by Mitch Albom. You may know Mitch Albom. He wrote his first book, is Tuesdays with Morrie, and he's written lots of books since. Very impressive man who has a tremendous social conscience, and he helps you really keep reevaluating the business of living. So I read his article, which I encourage you to get. And it's the whole notion of we have a new silent enemy. And he says one that could take us down quickly. And he said, and it's not COVID-19. What he's saying is it's our patience. We are losing patience. And I read the article. I thought it was brilliant. I'm going to give you some excerpts of it. And then I'm going to talk to you about some suggestions. I encourage you to get a pen or a pencil to write this down. And of course, if you want, I'll give you a copy of my notes of what I encourage you to do to develop more patience. What I notice now is a whole huge population of people are becoming impatient with about everything. The degree to which people are complaining and whining and criticizing and finger pointing and blaming is just enormous. And I notice that a whole huge population of us is becoming very impatient because there's such a gap between how life is supposed to be versus how life is. And what I encourage you to remember is you can actually learn to develop patience and actually enjoy this period rather than consider it a colossal pain in the neck and it's denying you the opportunity to be productive or happy or something like that. So first, let me ask you, Mike. Mike is our producer. Mike, I presume you're online with us right now.
Yes.
And you have small children and you also have a job. And your wife also has a job, and all of you are at home to some degree, much or most of the time. Is that right?
Yes.
So therefore, you, as I talked about what people are experiencing, and people are calling me for private therapy to manage through this, I can only conclude is the fact that you've had to stay at home and the whole nature of how life works now has turned upside down. The cards that are dealt to all of us now are quite a different set of cards. And we are unused to it. And as you know, a lot of people are saying we've got to open up the economy and we got to go back to work and we got to do this and we shouldn't do that. And people are getting more and more impatient and more angry. So my question to you is, since you are with your children and your wife and you both have jobs and the kids need to be managed, do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
Exactly. You're hitting it on the head because this is a wild time and it's very challenging. It is hard to manage the emotions that we're having throughout the day, multiple times throughout the day.
Exactly. And it feels like you're unable to get anything done because you're trying to do this thing and then the kids want something, or you're trying to take care of the kids and then a client wants something. You're trying to, for example, do your work online with people, and it's very difficult to do that because this is enormously different from how it's supposed to be. Is that right?
Exactly.
So I notice that a lot of people are getting very frustrated. A lot of people getting angry, or they're getting insecure, or they're getting really frightened about money, or they're getting frightened about how am I going to feed my children. There's all kinds of things people are experiencing here. And one thing that an enormous population of people are now experiencing, only because we hear about it or read it or see it on television, that people are kicking and screaming and jumping up and down. So what I notice now, people are getting enormously impatient. This is supposed to be fixed by Tuesday. And the reality is this has upended our life in so many different ways that it really is incumbent upon us to realize these changes are real. And rather than resisting all the changes and trying to hide under the desk in hopes that it will all go away, now we have to play a whole different set of cards and handle it accordingly, or do what I call follow the mantra of the Marines. And if you remember the Marines, you may know something about improvise, adapt, and overcome. I presume you have heard that before, Mike. Is that right?
Yes, I have.
Okay. So some people who are highly skilled at improvise, adapt, and overcome think that's a gimme. Of course you improvise, adapt, and overcome. If I'm unable to do it this way, I'm just going to have to figure out some other way to do it. And yet there's a lot of people who just say that's not how it's supposed to be. I want my life back the way it was. And it's entirely possible for a good portion of this year and perhaps into next year, because actually nobody really knows what's going to happen. It's entirely possible we have to be prepared for improvising and adapting and overcoming through this year and perhaps next year. And a whole lot of things may be permanently changed. Exactly what those are, really nobody quite knows. All I know is a lot of people are really quite anxious. And I'm hearing from you, Mike, that's something around which you are clearly identifying. Is that right?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so I want to read a few lines here from Mitch Albom's article, which I thought very thoughtful and very good for us as human beings. And then I'm going to concentrate the rest of today's broadcast on how to be more patient with yourself, more patient with your family, more patient with your customers, more patient with the fact that the cards have changed. We are all playing different cards than we used to play. And we can either say, I refuse to play the cards and hide and obsess and catastrophize and awfulize, or we can say, all right, this is a wonderful opportunity for me to learn how to adjust my thinking, adjust my behavior, be more patient with life, be more patient with our families, our customers, and certainly with ourselves. Because if you get very impatient, Mike, and everybody does get impatient, do you notice that relationships with yourself and relationships with other people tend to deteriorate?
There's a tremendous amount of strain when we get impatient, when I get impatient.
Exactly. Of course, Mike, if only you would change, everything would be fine.
Right.
Okay. So here's Mitch's remarks, just a few excerpts for your consideration. He says, Americans are not a patient people. Our news cycle is 24 hours. A big story, 48 hours. We get bored with long reads. We're making movies in 10-minute increments. Our president communicates in tweets. We want things fast, now, and over. We do get impatient. I notice over many decades that I've been in practice, I notice that more and more people would rather see it on video than read it. People would rather have the short version than the long version. People who write books, we know there's something called a high buy, low read factor. That means customers who buy books rarely read the whole book. And we notice that everybody wants things in bite-sized bits. So he said, so last week, as weather turned sunny and the calendar turned to May and reports began to spread of other states opening up, you could almost feel the collective problem in Michigan. That's enough already. 6 weeks, we're done with this. And you do know that there's some experts that are clearly saying, look, you got to be real careful. If you go out in public, you got to wear a mask and you do got to do social distancing. And if you decide that everything is hunky-dory and let's go on the beach or let's go into a public park with a whole bunch of other people, you got to be very careful, because it's now predicted by many people who are quite smart that if you fail to do the social distancing and you fail to do a mask, it's entirely possible there'll be a big jump in infections with COVID-19 and the now designer mutations that virus is having. So he says, Mitch says, the problem is coronavirus is not done with us. Let's be real about our levels of patience. There are those who have none, who were fed up with the very talk of pandemic and didn't believe it was true. Then there are those with no patience for a lockdown, followed by those who thought a few weeks was enough and then a month. And so by virtue of that, I presume most of you watching now and listening would say when you get impatient, you get ineffective. Most all of you would say that's probably true. And you'll notice when you get impatient because life is like this and it should be like that, what ends up happening is you spend more time kicking and screaming and describing the problem than figuring out what you're going to do about it. He said, we may be weary of homeschooling with our kids, but shame on us if we can't do those things for 6 whole weeks without acting like the world is ending. What I notice, because I've dealt with working with people on handling change, what I notice is most grown-ups have real trouble with change. Kids love change. Kids say, I can hardly wait. And yet grown-ups have trouble with change. So most grown-ups really are ill-equipped to prosper with change. The reality is that did we want this thing to happen to us? The answer is no. Did it happen to us? Yes. Has it changed our lifestyle profoundly? Yes. Is it very possibly going to go back to normal? It's possible. On the other hand, our behavior patterns are really requiring us to be different. And as a result, we are getting very impatient. So therefore, what I would suggest that you think through is, well, you can either describe the problem, and that's all you do. You can either resist this new change and blame somebody else, which a lot of people do, or you can say, okay, the cards have changed. Now what do I do? How do I improvise? How do I adapt? How do I overcome? So what I did is I thought to myself, Mitch Albom really set the stage for this and said a whole lot of terrific things. And I decided, well, a lot of my expertise has to do with how do you manage your state of mind. And what I would say to you is I've got a bunch of items for your consideration that will help you be more patient, that will help you capitalize on what you can do about it, and will help you recover much faster if all you do is spend your time being impatient and cranky or depressed or withdrawn, or you're hiding under the desk because you're thinking maybe it'll all take care of itself. So for your consideration, I'd like you to absolutely think about the Marines. And the Marines have a mantra, and they've been saying it for many, many years. You may have heard about it: improvise, adapt, and overcome. So if improvise, adapt, and overcome is, well, here's this obstacle, I got to figure out how am I going to deal with it. That would therefore suggest that the Marines, and perhaps some of you, are used to being proactive. So if you're writing notes, I'd like you to write the word proactive, comma, or / reactive. My experience is most people, especially adults, most people, when something has changed, they spend more time reacting than proacting. I talked to a guy the other day. He referred to me a high-tech company. This high-tech company is having trouble right now. And so what's happening is their income is going down. People are being laid off. People are very, very scared. Well, what most all people do in any kind of company when people get laid off or business goes down or things have changed is what they do is they start freezing. They start reacting rather than proacting. When there's a new leader selected, most everybody in the company will say some form of, oh boy, what does this mean to me? When people do what does this mean to me, they invariably freeze. They tend to spend more time reacting than proacting, which means they generally are more dependent rather than independent. They are generally willing to make the second or third or fifth move rather than making the first move. Well, my thoughts are, let's talk about how you can contain your emotions, how you can learn how to spend more time thinking about what am I going to do about this, rather than how long am I going to whine about this? So first things first, my recommendation is think about making the first move more than half the time. My experience is, as a clinician, the more you make the first move, the more you get on the dance floor first, the more you take initiative to say, okay, let's figure out what we're going to do about it. Invariably, you will recover much faster because now you feel like you're in charge of the next several moves, as opposed to you are hostage to what's going to happen to you. Most grown-ups operate from fear more than anything else. And so because most grown-ups operate from fear, as you can imagine, there's an enormous population of people in the country now that are really quite afraid. How am I going to do this? I don't know what I'm going to do. Where am I going to get another job? They spend more time describing the problem than solving it. And what I notice is when sometimes these things happen to us, bad things happen to good people, you may notice that often after you got through it, whatever it was, you'll notice that, well, maybe there was some good news that can happen because of the way you're conducting yourself. For example, would you say, Mike, if you think about your relationship with your kids and you're around them now all the time, would you say that's a really good opportunity for you to develop your relationship with your kids rather than being unable to spend more time with your kids simply because you're working all the time? Would you say that's possible?
Yes, tremendous possibility. I agree 100%.
And think about how many people work and work and work and work all the time, and then they take a leave or they retire because they want to spend more time with their family. You've heard that 1,000 times. Right. And so therefore, most people invariably wish they would have spent more time with their children, especially when the children were young, and yet for a variety of reasons, they thought they couldn't. And so they would be addicted to work when they wish they would spend more time with their children. Well, now you've got an enormous amount of time that you can spend with your children, so you can actually be proactive about doing that. as opposed to unhappy because you're unable to work. It's just a shift in the way you look at it. The cards are, you can play these cards, spend more time with your kids, or spend more time with your spouse, rather than saying, well, we're stuck at home and I'm irritated with my spouse and my kids are making me crazy. Notice if you look at a situation that you're dealing with and you decide to be reactive about it, you're much more likely to complain, criticize, and feel bad, rather than, well, now what can I do about this? How can I capitalize on these relationships that are important to me? That sounds so simple and sounds so commonsensical. And yet, much of the time we will look at the way life is supposed to be, then we'll get upset because life is different, like it clearly is now. And so therefore, we are more reactive than proactive. So my recommendation is think about, all right, if I was going to be more proactive and do something about this, what might I do and how might I get started? Now, for me, just to let you know, I'm kind of an odd duck, and that is I've always been an entrepreneur. I've always been self-employed. And so I started out in 8th grade being some form of self-employed, and I've been doing that ever since. So that kind of comfort that I feel about taking initiative and being proactive is pretty easy for me because I've been doing it my whole life. I certainly have had ups and downs professionally. I've had successes and failures, and I've certainly had some successes and failures in my personal life. And having said that, because it's pretty easy for me after decades of practicing, it's easy for me to take initiative and be proactive. It's almost like walking or riding a bike for me. Well, you can actually learn how to do that because most people spend their time being afraid and therefore reactive. And when you react more than you proact, then you end up feeling weak. Mike, do you know what I'm talking about?
I do. I agree. You're more in control.
Sure, exactly right. And you're always going to be by far more effective when you are able to and willing to take the first move, even if it's less than the perfect decision. Or to put it another way, Mike, would you say that it's easier to start your car and get going than it is to go 60, 70 miles an hour and stop the car? Mike, you there?
Sorry, I think it's probably easier to stop the car than it is to get going.
Really? You think so?
I don't know. I just
Well, let me ask you this. You're going down the freeway at 70 miles an hour, and now you really have to stop the car.
Right.
Because you see some obstacles up in front of you. Is that going to scare you? And is it going to be difficult to stop that car?
Yeah. Well, sure.
All right,
certainly.
okay. All right. Now you're in your car, it's running, and you put it in drive. Is it easier to start getting going, or is it easier to stop?
Well, I still think for some reason it's easier to just stop the car. To hit the
Really?
brake. Yeah.
Well,
it takes a while to get going.
To be sure. On the other hand, what gets you more frightened when you have to stop the car quickly?
Stopping the car, for
There
sure.
you go.
Stopping
Okay.
the car.
All right.
Sure.
So my experience is most people really think about the reaction to I have to stop the car, and yet it's pretty much quite comfortable to put it in drive and put your foot on the accelerator. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
So therefore, it's my view is most all of life is about starting something as opposed to stopping something. Another example, do you notice that you get very critical, or do you know people who get very critical?
I know people that get very critical with themselves and
Exactly.
their spouse.
Okay. And if they've said to themselves, I got to stop doing that, or I got to quit being critical of my spouse.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what's easier to do? To stop being critical of yourself or your spouse, or is it easier to start being reinforcing?
I think it's easier to start being reinforcing.
Therefore, it's always easier to start stuff than stop stuff. Because it's easier to do that, notice starting stuff is proaction. Stopping stuff is reaction. Let's do another one. Have you ever said, I love ice cream. I got to stop eating ice cream. I'm eating too much ice cream. I have to stop it.
I think I said that last night.
You did. Okay. And when you say I have to stop eating ice cream, all you think about is ice cream. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. If you say I'm going to start eating more healthy foods, does your brain go in that direction?
It does. It does help.
So it's all about proaction over reaction. Therefore, if you're impatient, what's going to work better? If you're impatient, what's going to work better? That you stop being impatient, or you start working on being patient.
To start working on being patient.
Exactly right. Therefore, let's do some exercises right now on how you start being patient. You ever heard of something called meditation or being mindful? You ever heard that? Okay.
Yep.
That's basically concentrating on the emotions that you want to pay attention to. So meditation, being quiet, closing your eyes, and simply concentrating on the images that you want to concentrate on. You will notice if you, for example, concentrate with your eyes closed on, let's say, a babbling brook in the mountains, and there's birds singing, and it's a beautiful day, and you're looking at the mountainside, and there's a babbling brook. If you're there and you're the only one there, and you concentrate on that, do you become more relaxed?
Yes.
Well, do you suppose when you become more relaxed and you think about that kind of stuff, that your emotions tend to also become relaxed, and therefore you have physiological and endocrinological, which is hormones, changes in your body, which means blood pressure will go down when you think of that stuff. And when you get impatient, blood pressure goes up. Is that true?
That makes sense.
Which would therefore suggest practice makes perfect. So one thing we recommend for a lot of people, if they get very impatient, is to just stop for a moment, collect yourself, close your eyes, and start thinking about what would make you really feel relaxed. When you do that on a regular basis, your brain gets used to it, at which point that's more proaction than reaction. There's another thing you can do, and I talked about it briefly. Would you say during COVID-19, if you're at home with whoever's there, and could we say you start thinking about your network of people personally and or professionally?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so is being at home a real good idea to reach out and connect to people in your network, people you care about, people you respect, people you enjoy, people that you get to reach out and have a catch-up call? Would that be good? And would that be helping you to both enjoy life more? And would it be helpful for your business? And would it also be helpful for your feeling of patience?
I've done that a few times this week, and it's been a good result each time.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Let's do another one. When you are patient and you behave in a proactive fashion, what happens to your self-respect?
I feel stronger. I feel better. It increases.
Sure. So the next question is as follows. When you become impatient, intolerant, cranky, critical, all that stuff, hard on yourself, hard on other people, when you do that, what happens to your self-respect?
It goes down. It's lower and minimizing.
So could we say that if you perpetually think about taking initiative on a proactive basis, and you think carefully about what you might do, is it a good idea to do something where your self-respect goes up?
Definitely.
Sure. So what's interesting about that is people who get impatient end up behaving in a bad fashion, which costs them self-respect. And people who are patient invariably are people who are generally calm, they're generally steady Eddie, they're generally willing to improvise, adapt, and prevail. And so therefore, I recommend that one of the ways you can become more patient is to say, well, wait a second, do I really want to cost myself my own self-respect if I end up behaving badly? And if you just think of that, I want to make sure that my self-respect is intact. If I do that on a regular basis, I'm probably going to be more thoughtful. I'm probably going to be more patient. I'm probably going to take initiative that actually helps make my life better. For example, what we're doing now during this whole COVID-19 is we're really, in my company, we're stepping up our ongoing initiative to make contact with people in our network. And what's more than coincidental is while we are taking a lot more initiative to check in and see how our clients and patients are doing, isn't it just coincidental that they now want to talk to us some more or set up an appointment? What are your thoughts about that? Would that follow, Mike?
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Here's another thing. What would you say if I told you, Mike, that more and more people are tending to their garden and or they're wanting to plant food in their garden? So more people are either making the garden more nice at home because they got more time to be there, and the other thing they're doing is they're growing more food. What would you say? Okay,
so, yeah, I'm seeing it all the time. Here we are, and our neighbors are, and
exactly
definitely.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the things that's really good for you and your kids is to tend to the garden together. One thing that's really good is to plant certain kinds of food that you want to grow. Because one, it always tastes better. It certainly is without all the pesticides and the hormones and all the stuff that industrialized farming does. Moreover, it allows you to get it close to your kids, and it's a relaxing thing. Lots of people who gardening and grow food actually enjoy the experience, and therefore they're more patient. Interesting what you may want to do there. Here's another thing you may want to do. What I recommend highly is that you develop a cheese list. Now you may say, what? Well, Mike, you're familiar with Swiss cheese. Is that right?
I love Swiss cheese.
Okay, if you know about Swiss cheese, you know Swiss cheese is made up of cheese and holes. Is that true?
Right. Yes, it is.
Question. When you go to the store to buy Swiss cheese, are you buying the cheese or the holes?
I'm buying the cheese.
That's right. Yeah. When you eat Swiss cheese, are you enjoying the cheese or the holes?
I'm enjoying the cheese.
Okay. If you could figure out a way to make Swiss cheese and there'd be an absence of holes, would that be good?
That would be better. Be more cheese.
Exactly. So therefore, if you think about a cheese list, my experience is most people are so hard on themselves. Most of you out there are so self-critical, and you feel so inadequate or ill-equipped or unlovable or whatever, that your brain automatically goes to the holes rather than the cheese. If you think of yourself as Swiss cheese, you got a whole bunch of cheese and you got some holes. Mike, what's got more volume in Swiss cheese, the cheese or the holes?
The cheese has more volume.
Therefore, could we say the cheese is the good stuff and the holes are the absence of cheese?
Yes, we can say that.
Most grown-ups are really good at making a list of all the holes in themselves. What that simply means is people are so used to feeling stupid and inadequate and criticized and all that kind of stuff that they immediately start making a list of the holes. One of the things that I help people learn to do, which allows them to start changing and replacing their state of mind from weakness and being hostage and dependent to now strength and being self-respecting and more independent, is to continually take inventory of the cheese. So what I ask my patients to do all the time is, I want you, the next time you talk to me, I want you to submit to me a cheese list. And they'll say, what is that? And then I'll describe to them exactly what I just described to you. What's interesting is when you actually have to make a list of all the qualities about yourself that you consider to be cheese. Now, when I say cheese, the bottom of the list would be it's acceptable, and the top of the list would be it's terrific, and everything in between. What's interesting is when you start making that list, for a lot of people, it's very difficult for them to do it because they're so unused to doing it. Over time, the list gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and you realize, what do you know? I have a whole bunch of cheese. Question. When you realize you've got a whole bunch of cheese, a whole bunch of qualities in yourself that you consider to be at the bottom good and at the top outstanding, what happens to your patience? What happens to your calm inside yourself? Mike?
Oh, I think it improves. It gets better.
Exactly right. And so therefore, since most grown-ups are always so self-critical and feeling inadequate and stupid and unlovable and defective, invariably then you're going to react and be afraid, which means you're much less likely to proact and make the first move. When you operate from self-respect, when you operate from your cheese, then you're much more likely to figure out a way to improvise, adapt, and overcome during COVID-19 or any other situation for that matter. So I really recommend you consider a cheese list. And while that sounds kind of funny, and while it almost sounds kind of elementary, you might be rather struck to know or to notice that when you begin the process of a cheese list, it really is a struggle at first. You'll come up with 2 or 3 items, and then you'll say, I don't know anything else, until you say, well, what do you know? That's cheese. I like that. I'll put that there. And what's curious about that is kids, particularly elementary school kids, have a much easier time coming up with a cheese list than grown-ups. Does that surprise you, Mike, at all?
No, that doesn't surprise me.
I know, it's kind of irritating, isn't it?
Being a grown-up is challenging. We
Yes.
do these self-deflating things.
Exactly right. And so the other thing I encourage you to do if you really want to be more patient, question. When it comes, write this down, people, when it comes to the way you demonstrate regard to other people, you will do it in 1 or 2 of 3 ways most of the time, for the same reason that when you get feedback from other people about how they feel about you, there are 3 ways in which they will do it, and most of the time they do it in 2 out of the 3. So write down feedback, and then think about how you give feedback to other people, and then think about how they give feedback to you. Because there are 3 ways in which grown-ups show regard for each other. Number 1 is called criticism. Number 2 is called silence. And number 3 is called reinforcement. Criticism, silence, reinforcement. Question, Mike. Generally, my experience both professionally and personally is most all grown-ups become experts at 2 of the 3. Once again, criticism. Number 2 is silence. Number 3 is reinforcement. Most all grown-ups, personally and professionally, with other grown-ups, become experts at 2 of the 3. Mike, what are the 2?
I think they're different from everybody, but probably, I don't know.
Well, are people pretty good at criticizing each other?
Yes, very good. That's
Okay,
the strongest.
Are people pretty good at being silent? That means they just shut down and they avoid saying anything.
Yes.
And would it be true that criticism is certainly verbal, that silence is sort of nonverbal? Silence is essentially criticism with the volume turned down. Would you say that's true?
Yes, definitely.
All right, so here's the deal. Would you say you probably deliver ongoing reinforcement to your small children routinely?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, by experiences, most all grown-ups are pretty good with reinforcing small children and dogs.
Yeah, right.
So here's the deal. Do most people, most grown-ups, want more reinforcement from each other?
Certainly.
Yeah, and are we good at doing that to other grown-ups?
No.
No. So question, what do you want to do? Stop criticizing, or do you want to start reinforcing each other?
Start reinforcing.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I'm struck with how often people are love-starved, or they are reinforcement-starved, or they really want care, regard, affection, appreciation, thanks. They generally want that from other grown-ups, and they rarely get it, which is why everybody generally operates from so much fear and weakness. So if you want to be more patient, what would happen if you wanted to be more patient? So therefore, you're going to replace the impatience with patience. If you wanted to do that, and you started practicing telling other grown-ups things you like, appreciate, admire, respect about them, what do you suppose will happen, Mike, to your patience development when you spend more time reinforcing than criticizing?
I think it will go up. I'll get better at it.
And question, during courtship, because you are married, and if you go back to courtship, I'm guessing you and your girlfriend at the time with whom you were courting, I'm guessing you spent more time reinforcing her, and she spent more time reinforcing you. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say so.
So what's the likelihood that you probably are unlikely to overdo more reinforcement to each other now?
To overdo it, low likelihood of that.
Exactly. So could we say, gee, if I spent more time reinforcing people I care about, I'd actually feel better. Yes?
Yeah.
And if she spent more time doing the same thing to you, would she and you feel better?
Yeah, certainly.
So therefore, could we say ongoing delivery of reinforcement calms down impatience and being cranky?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does. And I've got a whole bunch of other items here that I would be happy to send to you if you like this material and you're thinking these really reek of common sense. And remember, common sense is very uncommon. Of the things I talked about today, and I've got a whole bunch more, Mike, what stood out to you specific to managing your emotions and learning how to be more patient?
I think it's important to be more proactive rather than reactive. I loved what you said. How might I be more proactive today? So
Yeah.
as someone asking themselves that question, that
Yeah.
gets their head right.
That's right.
I love that. And I love the other thing you said, how might I start being more patient today?
Yes.
Rather than stopping being impatient, start
Exactly.
being more patient. I love
That's
that.
right. Your brain will go where the brain is directed. And if you say, I got to stop eating ice cream and I got to stop being so suspicious and I got to stop being so defensive and I got to stop being so critical, all you think about is how defective you are. On the other hand, if you say, well, I want to start doing this and start doing that and start figuring it out and start showing more care and regard and start spending more time with my kids. And how about start reading? Turn off the boob tube and start reading. I mean, just anything like that is going to make you more proactive.
Dr. Perry, where can people find more information to get more information you have available? And then can you share some insight into what next Tuesday and Friday will look like?
Yes. First off, to get more information, if you would like to get a copy of all my notes here on this material, I'll be happy to send it to you with my compliments. You simply go to jmperry.com, initial J, initial M, Perry, jmperry.com, and send me an email. Comments, questions, requests, what you're looking for, or there's an 800 number. It's 800-JM Perry, 800-JM Perry. Either one on the phone, or you can go to our website. That's one to get the information. The other thing I encourage you to do is go to any form of internet and type in Mitch Albom article May 3rd. And then you will get that article, which I highly encourage that you both read it and also read a lot of what he writes. He's brilliant from my view. Very, very good writer. And then with respect to Tuesday mornings, we're going to be on live here, Facebook and YouTube on Tuesday mornings. And so if you would like to ask me questions specific to anything for that matter, because we're all about people, relationships, performance, common sense. If you want to ask questions, feel free to write questions and go to jmperry.com. And my email address is there, and you can send me a question. I'll answer it on live Tuesday mornings. And then the subject matters that I respond to, Mike generally has a variety of questions that he gets from other people. So between Mike's questions and your questions, that Tuesday morning is all about Ask Dr. Perry. And I'm happy to do so and make it funny too at the same time. And then we will come up with a variety of additional material on Friday morning, just like today, where I hope you found value in the material about how to become more patient and capitalize on the whole notion of improvising, adapting, and overcoming, which is proactive, rather than being hostage and afraid, which is what most people do. What else, Mike?
I think that concludes today. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you next Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. and Friday morning at 9 a.m.
Always a pleasure. See you then. Thanks for watching.